weekday show. Today's date is June 9th. It is Monday, TGIM. And John Combest, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Brad.
A couple little technical snafus here at Radio Ranch. Always happens over the weekend. Power drops out due to some of the storms and stuff like that. So everything may not be working properly, but I'm working to get it all going. John, lots of stuff to talk about this morning. But you know what? I have the solution to so many problems. Nobody will ever listen to me. I don't know why that is, John. Why won't people listen to my solutions?
Well, more are listening to you now that I linked to the show on my website. And thanks to you, Brad, and specifically thanks to Nick Perryman, our show is now available on Apple Podcasts. Thanks to you, I know that, Brad.
How did that happen? Well, here's my point, John. I could fix the LA riot situation right now. You put me on a plane to LA, give me a government credit card with like maybe about a $30,000 or $40,000 credit line. I could fix the LA riot problem right now. You know how I'd do it?
You would exhume the great Rodney King and shove a microphone in his face.
No. You're close. I would go to LA. There's lots of excellent sound people in LA. I would rent myself a flatbed truck. I would rent a really killer sound system, put it on the back of the flatbed truck, and just drive that flatbed truck with the sound system in downtown LA with this loop.
I just want to say, can we all get along? Can we get along?
And immediately people go, whoa, hold on. There's Rodney King. He's talking about the LA riots from back in the day. Rodney's right. And immediately the rioters would take off their kahifas, or how do you pronounce that, John?
I don't know. I always call them koofies that they wear over
koofies. Their head. Is that like a koozie can kind of thing?
It's a little bit like a beer koozie, yeah. And you're saying they would lay down their arms, their rocks, their Molotov cocktails once they heard the melodious sound of Rodney King.
Well, it'd take a couple times if they just did maybe twice.
I want to say,
maybe we can find Reginald Denny, the poor white guy that got hit in the head by a brick, and cart him around too.
Right. And immediately they would go, you know what? Rodney's right. And they would immediately throw down their kahifas, whatever their weird stuff is, like we talked about before, and they would go up to one of the LAPD guys or now one of the National Guardsmen and give them a nice big hug and say, you know what? I'm sorry. We were wrong. You go back to your home. We'll go back to our home. All's good. Don't you think?
Gavin Newsom just texted me, and he said to tell Brad to stick to the Westplex.
That is the voice of John Combest. Every single day for the past 23-plus years, he puts together this incredible website that chronicles all the stuff in the state of Missouri. Some people might even say it's the Drudge Report for the state of Missouri. Nothing fancy. Matter of fact, John uses a very sophisticated version of the web. John, what version is that?
0.0.
Yes, he's like prehistoric web. He's like DARPA 102, and some people may go, what the hell's that? Check it out. You'll figure it out. And what he does is he puts together all these lists of important links. And you just go to his website, and his links, he's got all the tags and all that kind of stuff there. Go to the links. You click on them. It'll take you to that source, whatever that is on the internet, an article, a video, something like that. But on this show, we bring in, what's your name again, sir? What do you call yourself?
I'm Casey Kasem.
We dig him out of the grave, dust him off, and he counts them down. Casey, are you ready?
Now on with the countdown.
And now, John's top three, and we start with...
In third place...
I had to include this story as story number 3 because it combines several of your favorite elements. It's got teachers, it's got the education system, and it might even give you, Brad, an opportunity to quote the great Dave Ramsey talking about money and savings and teachers. This story is brought to us by the progressive blog called Missouri Independent, and a content creator named Annalise Hanshaw. The headline, Retired Educators to Continue Substitute Teaching in Missouri Without Losing Benefits. Now, Brad, back around the COVID era, when schools were having teachers drop out of the profession left and right, Missouri lawmakers, in a rare case of actually looking ahead and using common sense, passed a law that said that retired school teachers could come back to the teaching profession as substitute teachers without losing their retirement benefits. And it gave them a 3-year window to do so. Lawmakers were like, let's check how this works for 3 years. And if it's a good deal, then we'll renew it in June 2025. That was the expiration date. Well, this session, lawmakers decided to get together, Brad, in a bipartisan way, which is pretty rare in the state of Missouri, get together and say, hey, we're going to keep this provision that allows former teachers that have a school education pension to still come back and get a paycheck for being substitute teachers. As you and I have discussed on this show, Brad, and you're way more of an expert than I am on this topic, is that schools are facing a huge decline in the number of folks, not only that want to be teachers, but that want to be substitute teachers. So to be able to find somebody who's familiar with a classroom that's willing to come back and actually deal with kids for 8 hours a day is a big deal. And Annalise Hanshaw in this piece points out that most substitute gigs pay between $100 and $125 a day. So lawmakers say, let's allow these ex-teachers to come back. It won't threaten their ability to keep getting their pension. So this seems, Brad, to be a common sense piece of legislation all around, wouldn't you say?
So they agreed to it, though?
Yeah, they did. And so the interesting thing here is that Ed Lewis, not to be confused with former wrestling star Ed the Strangler Lewis, this guy is a Republican from Moberly. He credits Stephanie Boykin, who's a black Democrat state rep from Hazelwood, of really pushing this issue. She's a former educator, and she says, hey, why don't we do anything we can to help the ex-retired teachers and also help the school districts?
You know, first off, I do have a little problem with this because I think this is what they call double dipping. You know what I mean? Just when and this is unfortunately very prevalent with superintendents in the educational system. There was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I can't remember which district he was at, but some dude who was like the grand poobah at one of the districts, and he retired, but then he went to Wichita, Kansas to run their school district because of the fact that since he was in another state, it wasn't double dipping, and
that's good for him. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's good for him, right? That's a creative way to use the laws in your favor.
But see, what it does is it encourages people to retire, quote unquote, in air quotes, and just go somewhere else. They're gaming the system, John.
That's great, Brad. Now, you're the guy that always preaches that retirement is the leading cause of death.
It is.
It would seem to me that if somebody that goes by that mantra, you would be happy for folks to, quote unquote, retire and then help their community by coming back as a substitute teacher.
Well,
and Brad, this piece also points out that 2/3 of substitute teacher roles in the state of Missouri are filled by people ages 50 and older. So don't you think, Brad, I mean, according to your mantra of retirement is the leading cause of death, let people retire on paper and then come back and earn $125 a day by showing a video in class and sitting there and napping and telling the kids they can't go to the bathroom.
John, in full disclosure, I tried to get on as a substitute teacher in Hazelwood. I think it was before we started doing the show, and what I found out was when I called the Hazelwood, head office there, a nice lady told me they don't even hire the subs anymore. They've subcontracted that to Kelly. Well, and they also had your permanent record in front of them, Brad, because you are a graduate of the Hazelwood School District, right. And they saw. They actually viewed your video on YouTube called Board of Education, and they're like, we can't let that man back on property. Which most of it was done on the grounds of Hazelwood High School. Yes. I don't know. Don't get me going on this. Here, let me just say one thing. The educational system in our country is screwed up. It's just screwed up. And that's all I'm going to say about it. It's just a mess. And part of the problem is that I told you this goofy cartoon I saw years ago. It was like one of these multi-panel cartoons. And it's funny, when I mentioned this on the air, I had a teacher contact me and say, can you send me that cartoon? I couldn't find it. But it had like 2 panels. It showed like a guy, in the old days, with a plow behind a horse, tilling his field. And then the next panel was, it had a guy on a John Deere tractor, with like a huge, wide 40-foot plow plowing his field. And it had a bunch of things like that. It had a guy, in a horse and buggy. And then the next panel was, it had like a guy in a Corvette or something like that. And the final panel was, it showed a classroom with students there, and the teacher was at the blackboard, and the students were raising their hands, and the next panel was students in a classroom with the teachers, with the kids raising their hands, and the only difference was the teacher was at a whiteboard. And I'm going like, man, doesn't that sum it up? Nothing's changed. It's the same stuff.
I think you should just have more compassion for the fact that teachers are largely destitute, Brad, and they need as much financial help as they can. Isn't that what your friend Dave Ramsey says?
Dave, and what's so funny, every time I bring this up to one of my teacher friends, they go ballistic over this. Dave Ramsey doesn't know what he's talking about. If you know the story, John's talking about the fact that Dave Ramsey dusted off the old Millionaire Next Door book. He knew the guy who wrote it, who's now no longer with us, and he decided he was going to redo it and like quadruple, or maybe, I think it was 10 times. I think it was the Millionaire Next Door had a sample size of 1,500 millionaires, and Ramsey did 15,000. And the number 3 most common millionaire, of the 5 categories, top 5 categories of millionaires in the United States, number 3 is teacher. And when you say that to a teacher, they get mad. That's not true. That's not true. I know a couple teachers, I could give their names out on the air right now, that I know are millionaires. And yet they will tell me, oh, I've got to be frugal. I have to reuse my baggies. I can't buy new baggies because of the fact that would be wasteful and I don't make enough money.
Well, that's why they have $1 million, right, Brad? And you know who also has $1 million, folks, in story number 2?
Up a notch to number 2.
You know, the Missouri legislature goes back today, Brad. I don't even know exactly how to introduce the story, but the legislature goes back today, the Missouri House of Representatives to be specific, to vote on a stadium deal. The Senate passed the stadium deal, and again, that's for building a brand new stadium for the Royals and funding improvements to Arrowhead Stadium for the Kansas City Chiefs. So the House convenes today, Brad, to discuss that legislation. And the fight, the battle in the Senate has led to something with a few local implications. And that is State Senator Nick Schroer, who lives in the Defiance area, is going to be the brand new chairman of the Missouri Freedom Caucus. This original reporting is brought to us by Jake Croson of the Missouri Times. He writes The Whispering Gallery. And this is in the brand spanking new edition that came out this morning. Brad, why do you think Nick Schroer ascended to be the chairman of the Freedom Caucus in the Missouri legislature?
You're talking about Ricky Schroeder?
We're talking about Nick Schroer, right, of the Defiance area. What do you think? Now, this is a hard question, but why do you think he ascended to be the leader of the Freedom Caucus?
Because he's the biggest Republican nutbag?
I wouldn't describe him that way at all, Brad, because the previous chair of the Freedom Caucus resigned his spot, stepped down as the leader of the Freedom Caucus last week. And that's a gentleman named Rick Brattin. He's from the western part of the state, Harrisonville. He was formerly, as of last week, the leader of the Freedom Caucus in the Missouri legislature. And he stepped down. He voted in favor of the big package that passed last week, Brad. Now, Rick Brattin says, for his part, that he voted for this deal because the stadium bill was going to pass anyway. It was a done deal. And he wanted to do the very best he could for his constituents to get the best deal on property taxes. And Rick Brattin spearheaded a deal that would allow most counties in the state of Missouri to be able to vote this coming April on whether or not to limit the amount of property tax assessments or to limit the amount that their property tax would go up every year, the amount that folks would have to pay. So Rick Brattin says stadium was going to pass anyway. He cut a deal to help real, regular, average Missourians, working Missourians, avoid more property tax increases. And, you know, members of the Freedom Caucus disagreed. And so there's a little bit of a dispute, and that is documented today by Jason Hancock of the Missouri Independent. And he talks about the split in the Freedom Caucus. I should point out that most members of the Freedom Caucus voted against the stadium deal. But Rick Brattin and a gentleman named Brad Hudson from Cape Fear, Missouri, voted in favor of the stadium deal with the property tax provisions. So a little bit of tension within that Freedom Caucus, Brad. And what it means in practical terms is that Nick Schroer is now the brand new leader of the Freedom Caucus in Missouri.
John, don't get me going on these caucuses. I think caucuses should be illegal. The caucuses are people band together, and what are the representatives in the centers? What are they elected to do? They're elected to represent essentially their citizens in their district, right? Not what a bunch of other guys say. Well, let's all band together and vote this way. No, represent your individual citizens. Now, here's what I say. I've heard a rumor. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard, you're laughing already.
I bet this has to do with basements, right, Brad?
No, I heard a rumor that Bill Eigel has been lobbying a bunch of the senators, a bunch of his ex-buddies in Jefferson City, and some of the reps that he dealt with, because he was never a rep, and they don't like him because he didn't take that step of going from rep to senator. He's been lobbying them to put a new Rams, a new Chief Stadium, a new Royal Stadium in Defiance. And Ricky Schroeder is not happy about that because it could be in his backyard. And then he'd have to move back to a basement in O'Fallon.
You were able to fit it all in, but I'm surprised you didn't make a what did Bill Eigel used to sell?
Skylights.
I started to say sunglasses.
Skylights.
My mouth is not working today, pardon the expression.
Skylights. Yes.
I'm surprised you didn't make a skylights reference, Brad.
Well, that was the thing that because there was controversy because the Chiefs fans wanted to keep the open air stadium, and Bill put in there that they would have removable skylights on the new Chiefs Stadium in Defiance. So. And matter of fact, the Hoffmans would put in a lot of money, and they would talk about it in their new paper that they bought.
Yeah, which I hope we get to in B Block. That's not story number one, but I'd love to tell you what is.
The number one.
You know, we're not exactly Los Angeles, but we do have some ICE protests. And of course, St. Louis Public Radio and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch were on the case this weekend. I'll point specifically to a piece that was posted late on Friday at St. Louis Public Radio. They have a lady named Heba Ahmad. Yes, Heba Ahmad. She's going to be really unbiased when it comes to immigrant issues. You know that. She showed a protest in downtown St. Louis. It had a lot of the usual suspects. It had pro-immigrant people with wacky signs. It had attorneys talking about the injustice and this terror and the fear that was going through the immigrant community thanks to ICE agents. I'd also point to kind of a cute picture. St. Louis Public Radio, a woman named Lily Gibbs, I guess, took pictures for St. Louis Public Radio, and she has a couple little Chinaman kid. One kid has a lollipop in his mouth. You know, that's terrible for your dental health. But he holds a sign that says, "Immigrants can come to my house to play Minecraft." That's cute. That's misspelled. And then there's a little kid that looks to be maybe like 4, and he's holding a sign that says, "ICE, you suck." Now, I don't know how Chinese people explain the word suck in their native language, or if they talk about it, if there's a phrase like that in Mandarin. I don't know how you explain to a 4 or 5-year-old the word suck. But anyway, at least it's kind of nice to see homemade signs that aren't prefab, that aren't just printed by your local union, a bunch of fat guys sitting around printing signs and handing them out to protesters. So if you want to see a cute image of a couple little Chinaman kids holding handmade signs, go to St. Louis Public Radio, and I have a link to it up on my website on Saturday, Brad.
Do they have pictures of any of those dastardly Republican legislators from the state of Missouri? Any of those signs like that?
No, they used all of those pictures at the Brad Hildebrand event on Thursday.
Oh, okay. Have I done enough damage in that first section, John? What do you think?
I think it's pretty good. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about David Hoffman, a successful businessman purchasing a local institution like the Washington Missourian. I hope we talk about that in B Block. And today's date, Brad, is June 9th for folks who want to hear B Block.
Did I say June 9th? Did I say?
You did it at the outset, but for folks who make it all the way through our YouTube videos, that's not uncommon for at least A Block. On June 9th, go to B Block, and maybe we'll talk about David Hoffman.
I think we're going to change B Block into Brad's top 3. What do you think?
I think that would be great, Brad. It would also give me another opportunity to sort my sock drawer and say, yep, oh, crazy. Never knew the P-51 Mustang did that.